Esther Coombe stripped the sheet off the 9th corpse in a fortnight and folded it as neat as if it were going back on the bed. Corner to corner, a press of the palm along the crease. The laundress, 4 shillings a week, the lowest wage under that roof. Nobody had asked her a thing, nobody meant to. 12 doctors had walked the Draycott Almshouse. 12, and every last one of them wrote down the same word. Hopeless. The parish officer said it out loud with a kerchief at his nose. It is the air of the place, gentlemen, the exhalations of the ground. Nothing a bucket can mend. 31 souls lived under that roof. 9 were already in the earth. But there were 2 blocks in that house, east and west, and there were 2 columns in the burial register, and the woman who boiled the linen kept her own list in a cramped hand on a folded scrap of paper she carried in her apron. She did not know it was evidence. One of those 2 columns was about to stop. If you have ever done the plain thing that worked while every qualified soul in the room looked the other way, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe so this one finds the people who need it, and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, back to it. Elmsworth, in Kent, in the spring of 1847. A small place, the kind of place a coach passed through without stopping. On the edge of it, set low against a stand of wet elms, stood the Draycott Almshouse, endowed a century before by a wool man who wanted his soul remembered, run now by a committee of subscribers under the new poor law, with a chairman and a ledger and a fixed idea of what charity ought to cost. 31 inmates. 2 blocks joined under one long roof. The east block held the women, the west held the men. Between them ran a flagged passage, a scullery, and the laundry, where a great copper sat over a coal fire and steamed the year's linen grey. Esther Coombe worked that copper. She was a widow. 2 winters gone since she buried her husband, a carter, dead of a chill that settled in his chest. She had no children living. She had her hands, and she had her habits, and she had the copper. For that she was paid 4 shillings a week, and given her bread and her corner and the leave to burn the coal the fire needed. She rose before the light. She had the copper filled and heating while the house still slept. She carried water in 2 buckets, 1 in each fist, her shoulders square to the weight, and she did not spill. She laid the coal with an economy that would have shamed a miser. And when the water came to the boil, she fed the sheets in, and the shifts and the bandages, and she stirred them under with a long ash paddle worn smooth as a spoon. She boiled everything. She did not do it because a doctor told her to. No doctor had ever told her anything. She did it because that was how a laundress got bedding clean. Because her mother had done it, and her mother before. Because dirt lifted in hot water and would not lift in cold. She boiled the sheets until the fouling let go and ran grey down the drain, and then she wrung them, and hung them, and folded them, and the folded stack smelled of nothing at all, which, to Esther, was the smell of clean. Her hands paid for it. They were red to the wrist, and beyond, the skin cracked at the knuckles, tight and shining after a long day at the tub. In the cold months they split and bled. She rubbed them with mutton fat at night, and wrapped them in a rag, and did the same the next morning. She never once thought of it as a hardship worth naming. It was simply the shape of the work. You could not get a sheet clean and keep a soft hand. She had chosen the sheet. You would have liked her, if you had met her then. Not because she was gentle, though she was, in her plain way, but because she was true all the way through. There was no performance in her. She did not know how to seem better than she was, and she felt no want to. Ask her a question, and she gave you the flat answer, no ornament on it. She had the dignity of a person who has stopped needing anyone's good opinion. She did her work cleanly. She buried her dead named. That was the whole of what she asked of a day. Now, she kept a paper. It was nothing to look at. A folded sheet, gone soft at the creases from handling, tucked into the band of her apron. On it, in a hand that had learned its letters late and never got easy with them, she wrote names and dates. Whose sheet, whose shift, when it came to the copper and when it went back. She kept it for the plainest reason in the world. She stripped every bed in the house. She mended the linen where it tore, and a mended shift had to go back to the woman it belonged to, or there'd be words, and rightly so. A body in a charity house owns almost nothing. A shift with your own darn in it, that's yours. Esther meant to see the right shift went back to the right woman. So she wrote the names. I keep the names, she told the matron once, when the matron asked what the paper was for, so the right shift comes back to the right woman. And the matron nodded and forgot it, because it was the least remarkable thing a person had ever said. A housekeeping habit, nothing more. She did not know she was keeping a record. She did not know that every name and every date on that soft grey paper was a line in an experiment nobody had set out to run. She was a laundress. She kept her list the way she wrung her sheets. Because it was the work, and the work was done properly or not at all. File it away. She has. The fever came in the second week of March. Nobody in that house had a name for what it truly was. They called it the fever, the Almshouse fever, the low fever. They spoke of it as a thing in the air, a bad vapour that rose off the damp ground and settled in the lungs of the weak. That was the whole of the medicine of the place, and the whole of its philosophy, and it was wrong, and it would go on being wrong while people died of it. What it was in the bedding, in the seams of the ticking and the folds of the blankets, a thing too small to trouble looking for, that bit in the night and left its red track on the skin, and passed from a foul sheet to a clean body and back again, and did its killing quiet. But no one in Elmsworth knew that. No one in England could have told you that, not for certain. Not yet. So they blamed the air, and they were sincere in it, and their sincerity buried people. It took the West Block first, and hardest. Now here is the thing you must hold in your mind, because it is the whole spine of this story. The West Block's linen was done cold. There was a contract washerwoman, a widow prentice, who came in and did the men's washing in tubs of cold water and lie and hung it damp in the passage. That was the arrangement. That was thought good enough for the men. And the East Block's linen, the women's, went to Esther and her copper and her boil. So from the very first days, the two blocks were not living the same life at all. They ate the same bread and breathed the same air and were called hopeless by the same doctors. But one block slept in cloth that had been boiled, and one slept in cloth that had been rinsed cold and hung damp. And the fever knew the difference, though nobody watching it did. In the West, they began to die. First an old man named Cottrell, who had been failing anyway, and then two more within days, men who had walked the yard the week before. In the East, the women sickened too, and two of them died in that first stretch, and Esther stripped their beds and folded their sheets and wrote their names. 2. In the East. And then, the East held, and the West did not. Esther felt the difference before she could have told you it was there. She was in and out of both blocks all day, gathering linen, carrying it back. She saw the West Ward fill with the smell of sickness and heard the counting the men did among themselves. Who's gone? Who's going? And she saw the East Ward, where the women lay pale and frightened, but mostly, so far alive, she tended a woman in the East called Mercy Dan. Old Mercy, near blind, her hands knotted with the rheumatism, who had been in the house longer than anyone and had no one in the world outside it. Esther brought her the boiled shift warm from the line and helped her into it and talked to her while she did it, low and plain, about nothing. The weather, the state of the coal. Mercy gripped her wrist with those knotted hands and would not let go for a while, and Esther let her hold on and did not hurry, though there was always more work than ours. "You'll strip my bed gentle when it's my turn," Mercy said one evening. "Not fearful, just settling it. "I'll strip it gentle," Esther said, "and I'll write your name proper, and you'll go in the ground a Christian with your own name on you. But it's not your turn yet, so drink your broth." In the West she came to know a man called Jonas Reed, younger than most in that block, not 50, a hedger once, with a countryman's stillness. He was not sick yet, those first days. He helped her sometimes, carrying the linen basket to the passage when her arms were full, because it was in him to be useful and there was little else left for him to be. He would nod to her across the yard. She would nod back. It was a small thing, and it was the kind of small thing that a house like that runs on, so I want you to count with her now. Because she was counting, in her cramped hand, on her folded paper, without knowing it was the only honest sum in the building. East, 2 dead, and then holding. West, climbing, 3, then 4, then 5. 2 columns, already drawing apart, and every one of them a name Esther had written, with a date beside it, because the right shift must go back to the right woman, and the last thing you can give the dead is their name spelled true. The committee called the doctors in when the count reached 7. They came on a grey morning, in a knot, 12 of them. Dr. Aldous Meacham first, the parish medical officer, a heavy, certain man with a good coat and a bad habit of being sure. And behind him the 11 subscribing physicians, gentlemen who paid their guineas to the endowment and took 2 guineas the visit for their trouble, in from the villages round about. Among them, at the back, the youngest, a Dr. Nathaniel Price, who said little and watched much. They went through the West Block first, 12 gentlemen in dark coats, each with a handkerchief or a scented cloth pressed to his nose, stepping careful between the cots as though the floor itself might rise up at them. They looked at the men. They did not touch them much. They talked among themselves in the low, grave voices of men agreeing with one another, and they wrote in their pocket-books. Then the East, and here is the picture I want you to carry out of this whole story, because it tells you everything. They filed into the East Ward, the 12 of them, and stopped at the head of it. And Meacham turned to address the others, warming to his theme. And 3 feet from his elbow stood Esther Coombe with a folded sheet across her arms, fresh off the line, still warm, boiled that morning. She had come to change a bed. She stood aside to let the gentleman pass, and then simply waited, because that is what a laundress does when the gentlemen are talking. She was between them. She was closer to the cause of it all than any man in that room, and not one of them saw her. She was furniture. She was part of the wall. Meacham lifted his cloth from his face just long enough to speak. "It is the air of the place, gentlemen," he said it to the room, to the ward, to the wet elms out the window. "The exhalations of the ground. You feel it. The house is built low and damp, the miasma settles, and the weak cannot throw it off. It is in the very air we are breathing now." A little grim smile. "Nothing a bucket can mend. The situation is, I am sorry to say it, hopeless," and around him the 11 nodded, and one by one they wrote the word. Hopeless, 12 pocket-books. 12 times the same word. Not a man among them dissenting, the whole weight of the profession gathered in one room, agreeing perfectly and agreeing wrong. Esther heard it. She stood there with the warm sheet on her arms, the sheet she had boiled at dawn, and she heard the learned man say that nothing a bucket could mend the thing that ailed the house. And she did not argue. Of course she did not. Who was she? She had 4 shillings a week, and no letters after her name, and a paper of names she'd have been ashamed to show a gentleman. She did not think, "He is wrong." She thought, "The gentlemen have said their piece, and now I had best change this bed." And she stepped past them and did it. By the end of that fortnight, 9 were dead, 2 in the east, 7 in the west, 9 folded sheets, 9 names on the paper. And the doctors had given their word, and their word was hopeless, and the word was a door closing. What followed from the word was the medicine of the word. If the air was the enemy, then you fought the air, so they fought the air. Vinegar was sprinkled on the floors till the whole house smelled of a pickling shed. Sulphur was burned in iron dishes till the men in the West coughed in the fumes of it. The windows were thrown wide to let the bad vapour out, which let the March cold in over the beds of the dying. Chloride of lime was set in dishes at the doors. The house reeked of remedy. And look what they did not do. They moved no one. They took not a single soul out of that block and put him in clean air, because to their minds the air was the same low bad air over the whole low ground. They changed no bedding. Why would they? The bed was not the enemy. The air was the enemy. So the same foul ticking stayed under the same sick men, and the vinegar was sprinkled over the top of it, and the sulphur burned, and the fever went on doing exactly what it had been doing, because none of it touched the thing the fever actually lived in. The west column climbed through all of it, through the vinegar and the sulphur and the open windows, another man and another, and the east held its two and held, and in the middle of all that ceremony, unregarded, the copper went on boiling. Esther filled it before light. She fed the coal, she stirred the women's linen under with her worn paddle, and lifted it steaming, and wrung it, and hung it, and folded it, and carried it back warm to the east ward. She wrote her names. She did the plain thing she had always done, in the middle of a house doing everything but, and her two columns went on telling the truth to nobody. Then the cure itself came under threat, and this is where you must not look away, because it is the coldest turn in the whole business. Jonas Reed took the fever in the 4th week. Esther saw it in him before he'd own it, the flush and the shrinking, the way he stopped carrying her basket because he could not. She brought him water when she could do little else. He was in the West, and the West was Widow Prentice's, and Prentice did the West cold, and Widow Prentice was growing afraid. She was not a foolish woman. She washed the sheets of men who were dying, plunged her arms into the tubs where their fouled linen soaked, and she saw them carried out one after another, and she began to believe the washing would kill her too. Her hands shook at the tubs. She did the work faster and worse, and stood back from it when she could. Meanwhile, in the committee, they had found a thing to worry at. The coal. Esther's copper burned coal, and coal cost money, and the ledger was a subscriber's ledger, kept close. Silas Harrow, the chairman, a careful man with a long memory for a shilling, ran his eye down the fuel account and did not like the length of it. The laundry burned more than any other fire in the house. He said as much, at the table, in the mild way careful men have when they mean to cut a thing. Was so much boiling needful? Could the laundress not do with less? The house was hard pressed, and the fever was a heavy expense, and here was the copper eating coal from dawn. Take that in. In that house, in that spring, the single thing that was actually holding the fever back, the one intervention that was quietly saving lives, was the fire under Esther's copper, and it was the fire the chairman looked at and thought, there is where I might save a little. The cheapest cure in the building was the line item he weighed cutting. He did not know it was a cure. That is the whole tragedy of it. Nobody had told him, because nobody knew, because the one honest record was a washerwoman's scrap he would not have troubled to read. The doctors came a second time when the dying would not stop. You might think a second visit would be a second look, fresh eyes, a doubt. It was not. Meekham walked the blocks again and reaffirmed every word. The ground was low, he said. The house was damp. The season was against them. He recommended a fresh coat of limewash on the walls to seal the exhalations, and he was pleased with the recommendation, and the committee approved the cost of the lime, which was a cost they did not begrudge, because it agreed with the theory. The theory was never in danger. The theory could not be wrong. It could only be insufficiently applied, and so they applied more of it. But one man among the 12 did a small thing that day. Dr. Nathaniel Price, the youngest at the back as always, said nothing to contradict his elders. But he took out his pocketbook, and he did not write the word hopeless. He wrote numbers. He wrote them by block. So many dead in the west, so many in the east. He looked at the two figures side by side on his own page, and a small line came between his brows, and he put the book away and said nothing. He did not know yet what he had, but he had begun, without meaning to count the way Esther counted. And a man who starts counting honestly is a dangerous man to a comfortable theory. Hold that. He'll be back for it. Now the point on which the whole thing turns. And it turns, as the largest things do, on the smallest and least noticed act. Widow Prentice quit. She could not do it any longer. The fear had eaten through her. She came to the matron one morning with her shawl already on, and said she'd not touch the west linen again, not for any wage, that the washing was death, and she'd sooner starve clean than earn dirty, and she went out the gate and did not look back. And that left the West Block's sheets, the men's fouled linen, Jonas Reed's bandages soaking in a cold tub, with no one at all to wash them. The matron did the obvious thing, the only thing. She came to the laundry, where Esther stood at her copper in the steam, and she said Prentice was gone and there was no one for the men's wash, and would Esther take it, just until they found another? Just for now? And Esther said yes. Of course she said yes. It was work that wanted doing, and she was the one there to do it. She did not weigh it. She did not think, this is a strategy. She had no notion of blocks and columns and variables. She was a laundress, and there was linen to wash, and now there was more of it. So she carried the West Block's sheets to her copper, Jonas Reed's among them, his fouled linen, his bandages. She fed them into the boiling water with all the rest, the men's with the women's now, and she stirred them under with her worn paddle, and she boiled them the way she boiled everything, until the fouling let go and ran grey down the drain, and the cloth came up smelling of nothing at all. She did not know what she had just done. She could not have known. To her it was Tuesday, and there was more washing than Monday, and her hands would pay for the extra load, and that was all it was. But you know. You have known since the first minute of this. You have been shouting it at the wall. The linen. It was always the linen. And on the very day her copper first reached the West Block's sheets, the thing that had been killing the men in that block, met, at last, the one thing in the whole house that could stop it. Boiled water. Done by the woman nobody thought to ask, for 4 shillings a week. Jonas Reed died that same day. He had taken it too early, before the copper ever came for his linen. The fever was too far into him, and the boiling of his sheets could not call him back from where it had already sent him. Esther stripped his bed that evening, gentle the way she'd promised Mercy she'd strip hers. She folded his sheet corner to corner and pressed the crease flat with her palm. She wrote his name on her paper and the date beside it in her cramped and careful hand. She did not know, as she wrote it, that she was writing the last name that column would ever take. She did not know the West had just stopped. She only knew that a decent man who had carried her basket was gone, and that his sheet, like every sheet, would be boiled clean before it went back on the bed. 2 columns, one of them still. And in all that house, on that grey evening, only one person had done the thing that stilled it, and she did not know she had done it. And of the 12 learned men who could have seen it, 11 were burning sulphur and ordering limewash, and one was at home, frowning over 2 small numbers in a pocketbook, not yet understanding why they would not leave him alone. Days went by. Then a week. And the West column did not move. Esther marked her paper each evening, the way she always had. A name, a date, the block. That was the shape of her bookkeeping. But now the pen came down, and there was nothing to write for the West. No name, no date, just the same men in the same beds, breathing, complaining of the broth, asking for another blanket. She did not understand it. She will tell you herself she did not understand it. She was a laundress, not a philosopher. She did not sit by her copper and reason it out. But she noticed, She had a laundress's eye, and a laundress's eye counts. And what it counted was this. Since Prentice left, since the men's linen started coming to her, the West had stopped burying. So she wrote that down too, not a name, a note. In her cramped and careful hand, in the margin of her folded paper, she wrote that the men's sheets now came to her copper, and she put the date beside it, because she wrote everything down. That was the whole of it. She was not making a case. She was keeping her account. And you are shouting at the wall again. The linen. It was always the linen. She is holding the answer in her apron band, folded 4 times, written in a hand that never went to school past 10. And she does not know it is an answer. She thinks it is a washing list. Now watch what the clever men were doing while she wrote. They were pleased. That is the part you must sit with. The doctors were pleased. The West had quieted, and they had ordered the limewash, and so plainly the limewash had done it. Meacham said as much to the committee. He said the fresh coat on the walls had answered the ground exhalations, and that the turning of the season had lent its hand, and that the worst was behind them now. He said it with his chin up. 11 men nodded. Not one of them had changed a bed. Not one of them had touched a sheet. They had sprinkled vinegar and burned sulphur and thrown the windows wide and painted the walls white, and none of it had stopped a single death. The thing that stopped the deaths was a woman lifting wet cloth out of boiling water with an ash paddle worn smooth as a spoon, and they had walked past her to reach the walls. 11 of them anyway, because there was one who was not pleased. There was one who could not let it go. Dr. Nathaniel Price was the youngest of the 12. He had a pocketbook, and in the pocketbook he had done the one thing the others thought beneath them. He had written the deaths down by block. 2 in the east, 7 in the west. He had that in his own hand, and now, in the 4th week, sitting at his own table by his own candle, he found he could not sleep for it. Because the West had stopped. 7, and then nothing. A column that climbed, and then, on a single day, went flat and stayed flat. Numbers do not do that on their own. Numbers do not simply decide to be kind. Something had changed on that day, and Price, who truly believed, that a doctor's whole duty was to follow the evidence wherever it led, could not put his book away until he knew what. The limewash. That was the answer he was given. But Price had watched the limewash go up, and he had a physician's memory, and he knew the walls were painted a full week before the column went flat. A cause does not come after its effect. Whatever stopped the West, it was not the wall. So he did what none of the others did. He went and got the parish burial register, the real one. The names and the dates kept by the sexton, cold and official and beyond dispute, and he laid it open on his table. And then he sent word to the Almshouse that he wanted the laundress's account, the little folded paper the matron had mentioned once and laughed at, and he set them side by side. Her scrap, and the register. A 4-shilling woman's washing list against the sworn record of the parish dead. And they agreed. Line for line, date for date, they agreed. Every name in the ground was a name on her paper, and every date matched, because she had folded the sheet off each of them and written it down that same evening. But her paper had something the register did not. Her paper had the note in the margin. The day the men's linen first came to her copper. And it was the day the west column stopped. Price sat very still. A physician of the year 1847, a man who knew the word miasma and not the word he needed, sat by a guttering candle and looked at 2 dates that were the same date, the day her copper reached the West Block, the day the men stopped dying. Not a week apart, not a rough coincidence of the season, the same day. He did not sleep at all. In the morning he did the thing 11 men had not thought to do in a fortnight of dying. He walked to the laundry, he walked past the whitewashed walls they were all so proud of, past the doors dusted with chloride of lime, and he went down the step into the steam, where the copper stood over its coal fire and the woman stood over the copper. She curtsied to him. Of course she did. Letters after a name still meant something to Esther Coombe, even now, even with the answer in her apron. She dropped him a small curtsy, with her hands red to the wrist, and she waited to be told what she had done wrong. "Mrs. Coombe," he said, "I want to ask you what you are doing." She did not understand the question. "Doing, sir?" "The men's sheets. And the women's after. I've a full copper this morning." No, he shook his head. He was a young man, and he was trying to be gentle, and he was failing a little because his heart was going too fast. "What are you doing that is different? In the West Block? What changed these last weeks?" And here is the moment. Here is the whole story in one plain answer, given by a woman who did not know she was giving it. "Nothing, sir," she said. "Nothing. I boil the linen. I always have. Only now I've the men's as well as the women's since Prentice left." She washed them cold, in the tubs. "I've no cold tub. I've the copper. So they come to the copper." Price said nothing. He was looking at the copper. He was looking at the steam coming off it. "I don't hold with theories, sir," Esther said, because the silence frightened her and she filled it the way plain people do. "I only know a clean sheet from a foul one. And I know which of my beds I've buried. I know which of my beds I've buried. Say that one over to yourself." She had buried them. She had folded the sheet off every one, and she had learned, without a word for it, without a theory, without a single letter after her name, she had learned which beds took her clean cloth and which had taken Prentice's cold-washed cloth. And she had buried the second kind. 2 guineas the visit, the doctor's cost. 12 of them. And the answer was standing in the steam, telling a boy physician that she only knew a clean sheet from a foul one. Price went back to his table, and he laid it out. To himself, first, layer on layer. You must hear it the way it fell on him, because it is the spine of the whole thing. Layer 1. The East Block was low from the first day. 2, and then it held. Why? Because the East was the women, and the women's linen had always gone to Esther's copper. Always, from before the fever ever came. Her ordinary washing, her boiled sheets, week in and week out. The East had been protected from the start, and no one had noticed, because no one dies from a thing that never happens. Layer 2. The West Block climbed. 7. Because the West was the men, and the men's linen went cold to Prentice's tubs, and Prentice's cold water did nothing to the thing in the bedding. The West climbed for as long as its sheets stayed cold, and then, on the exact day the copper reached it, it stopped. Layer 3. This is the one that took the breath from him. The cure was not a theory. It was not the air, it was not the ground, nor the season, nor the white on the walls, nor any of the 12 learned verdicts. The cure was boiling. Plain boiling water in a plain copper vat, and it was already in the house. It had been in the house the whole time. It had never left. It cost less than the vinegar they sprinkled, and less than the sulphur they burned, and it was done for 4 shillings a week by the one person in the whole almshouse that not one of the 12 had thought to ask a single question. The intervention that had halved the dying was the cheapest thing in the building. Price put his face in his hands. And then he did the honourable thing, which was also the useless thing, and he will learn the difference before this is over. He took Esther's paper, and he took the register, and he carried them up to Meacham and the senior subscribers, and he asked to be heard. They heard him. I will give them that much. They sat, and they let the youngest of them talk. He laid the 2 columns out on the table. He showed them the East, low from the start. He showed them the West, climbing. He put his finger on the date the West stopped, and then he put his finger on Esther's margin note, the day the copper reached the men, and he said, in front of all of them, "It is the same day, sirs, to the day." She began boiling their linen, and they stopped dying. It is not the limewash. The limewash was a week prior. It is the copper. There was a silence in the room. And then Meacham laughed. Not cruelly. That is what you must understand about Meacham. He did not laugh to be cruel. He laughed the way a man laughs at a child who has got a grand idea by mistake. He was the parish medical officer. He had led 12 physicians through that house. He had given the verdict out loud with the laundress 3 feet from his elbow, and his verdict had been the settled opinion of medical science, and here was the youngest man at the table asking him to set that science aside for a washerwoman's scrap of paper. "Dr. Price," he said, "you have found a coincidence and dressed it as a cause. The woman washes linen. Well and good. The season turns. The limewash dries. A dozen small things shift at once in a house like that, and you have seized on the one held by a servant because it flatters your feeling for the poor." He tapped Esther's paper with one finger. "This is a laundry list. It is not medicine. I will not have established science corrected by the boiling of sheets." And the senior men, the ones who had taken their 2 guineas the visit, the ones who had written hopeless in their own hands, they nodded. Of course they nodded. Because Price was not only saying the copper was the cure, he was saying they had been wrong. All 12 of them. Wrong for a fortnight, while 9 people were put in the ground, and the correction was coming up from the bottom of the house, from the lowest wage under the roof. That is the heresy. Not that a poor woman had done a clever thing. The heresy was that a confident, careful, honestly held theory held by 12 qualified men had been simply wrong. And the thing that proved it wrong was 2 columns of names that any child in the parish could have counted. The qualified men closed ranks. They always do. Price gathered his papers. He kept Esther's, folded, in his hand. And he went out. But the matter did not end in the medical men's room. Because there was a man above the doctors, and his name was Silas Harrow, and he was the chairman of the committee, and he answered to the subscribers who paid for all of it. And when it reached Harrow, it stopped being a question of medicine at all. It became a question of reputation, and that is a colder thing. Harrow understood the danger at once. Harrow was not a stupid man. Give him that. He grasped, faster than any doctor, what it would mean if this got out. The subscribers paid 11 physicians and a parish medical officer, and they paid 2 guineas a visit for the privilege. And the story now was that all 12 had been wrong for a fortnight while people died, and that the correction, the actual cure, had come from the laundress they paid 4 shillings a week. The cheapest servant in the house had held the answer, and the 12 most expensive men had walked past it with kerchiefs to their noses. You could not publish that, not if you were Silas Harrow, answerable to the men whose names were on the endowment. You could not let that leave the room. So he called the committee to the room where such things were decided. Picture it, an oak table, dark with age and polish. The subscriber's ledger open upon it, and in the margin of the ledger the figures for coal, in a clerk's neat column, Harrow at the head, the senior physicians down one side, and at the far end, saying nothing, Dr. Nathaniel Price, with Esther Coombe's folded paper held under the table on his knee, where no one had yet thought to ask him for it back. Harrow did not shout. Men like Harrow never need to shout. He spoke quietly, and the quiet was worse than any shouting, because it was final. "We are agreed the laundress does good work," he said. "Diligent work. Let it be recorded that her wage is raised from 4 shillings to 7, and her copper is to be kept hot the year round, winter and summer both, and the coal for it is no longer to be questioned in this account." He let that sit. That is a generous provision, and it is deserved, and it is the end of the matter. Someone began to speak. Harrow went on over him, still quiet. "But let no word of the reason leave this room. Not the columns, not the copper, not the doctor's paper. The subscribers do not pay 11 physicians and a medical officer in order to be corrected by a washerwoman. There is no benefit to this house, nor to this parish, nor to any soul now living in it, in publishing that our medical men were in error. The fever has ended. That is what the record will show. The fever ended, and the laundress was rewarded for her diligence. Nothing more. And down at the far end of the table, Price opened his mouth and closed it again, because he saw, in that moment, the whole shape of it. He saw that Harrow had done something clever and terrible in a single stroke. He had kept the copper burning. The cure would go on. Esther would boil, and the house would stay well, and the thing that worked would keep working. Harrow was not stopping the cure. That is the cruelty of it. He was rewarding it and burying it in the same breath. The people in the beds were saved, and the truth that saved them was to be swept into the grate. There was a moment, Price would remember it all his life, when the committee clerk reached across the table to tidy the papers, and his hand went toward the folded scrap that lay near the ledger, the copy that had been passed up, and he made to sweep it in with the day's rubbish for the fire. Just paper, just a laundry list in a poor hand. It was very nearly burned. It came that close. Harrow said, "Leave the doctor his sheet," without even looking, and the clerk drew his hand back. That was the sentence, not on Esther, on the room. The room had chosen, and its silence was the sentence it passed on itself. Now the payoff, and I am going to give it to you slow, the way it was earned, because each of these faces deserves its own moment, and I will not rush a single one of them. Go first to the laundry. The matron came down the step into the steam, where Esther stood with her hands in the water and the ash paddle worn smooth in her grip. And the matron told her, in the flat voice of someone passing on a message she does not fully understand, that the committee had raised her wage. 4 shillings to 7. For her diligence. That was the word. Diligence, not the copper. Not the columns. Not the 7 men in the West who had stopped dying the day their sheets first met her boiling water. Not one word of any of it, just diligence, and 7 shillings, and the coal no longer to be questioned. Esther wiped her hands on her apron. She dropped the small curtsy she always dropped. She said, "Thank you, ma'am." And she meant it, because 7 shillings was 7 shillings, and a widow 2 winters gone does not turn her face from 3 extra shillings a week and warm coal for the asking. But she understood more than they thought she did. You know that by now. She had a laundress's eye, and a laundress's eye counts. She had seen the young doctor come down into her steam and ask his questions. She had seen him look at her copper the way a man looks at a thing he has just understood. And she had not been raised 3 shillings for diligence. She had been raised 3 shillings for something, and no one would say what, and a woman does not need letters after her name to feel the shape of a thing that is being kept from her. She understood more than they thought, and far, far less than she deserved to be told. And then Mercy Dan came in. Mercy Dan, near blind, longest in the East Block of anyone, alive. Alive because her linen had gone to Esther's copper from the very first day, before the fever, before any of it. Mercy came in feeling along the wall with one hand, and in the other she carried her own washed shift, folded, and she knew it by the feel of the mend at the shoulder that Esther had put there. "This is mine, Esther," the old woman said. "I know it's mine. You always get mine back to me right." "It's yours, Mercy," Esther said. "Course it's yours." And she took it, and she folded it again, corner to corner, and pressed the crease flat with her palm the way she pressed every crease. And that was the whole of Esther Coombe's reward. 7 shillings, and an old blind woman who was alive to bring back her own shift by name. She never got the other thing. She never got told. Hold on to that. Now the faces of the 12, because they did not all take it the same way, and the difference between them is the marrow of this story. Measham first. The parish medical officer. When it reached him that the finding would not be published, that the committee had ruled it a coincidence and the copper a kindness, and the whole matter closed, do you know what Measham felt? Vindication. That is the horror of it. He did not feel shame. He felt proven right. In his mind, the committee's silence was not a burial of the truth. It was the profession declining to be embarrassed by a servant's fancy. He had said it was the air of the place. He had said nothing a bucket can mend. And here was the committee agreeing to say nothing at all, which to Measham was the same as agreeing with him. He revised not one word. Not that day. Not ever. He carried his verdict to his grave exactly as he had first spoken it, at the head of the east ward, with the answer standing 3 feet from his elbow, holding a folded sheet. Meacham's sentence was that he passed it on himself, and never knew. Then the senior subscribers, the men who had taken 2 guineas the visit and written hopeless, they felt something simpler. They felt relief. The matter was closed. Their fees were not in question. No one would stand up in the parish and say the physicians had been wrong. They went home to their suppers, and they accepted the silence, and the silence sat easy on them because there was money in it and no cost. That was all. Relief with the fees intact. And then Price. Price could not. He went home that night, and he sat by his candle, alone, with his casebook open in front of him and Esther Coombe's folded paper beside it. And he understood that he had lost. He had brought the evidence, exactly as he had always believed a doctor should, and the profession had not followed it. His whole faith that qualified men would go where the truth led, once you showed them the truth. That faith was in pieces on the table. He had shown them, and they had closed the door. But there was one thing left that no committee could vote away. One thing they had forgotten to take from him. He had the numbers. He had them in his own hand. So he did it. By candlelight, that night, Nathaniel Price copied Esther Coombe's 2 columns into his casebook. In full. Every name. Every date. The East, low from the first day. The West, climbing to 7, and then the flat line, and beside the flat line, the date the copper reached the men. He copied all of it. The sworn record and the laundry list made one. And then he did the thing that mattered. The one act in the whole of this story that put the plain truth somewhere it could never be swept into a grate. At the head of the column, where a physician's name would ordinarily go, he wrote hers, Esther Coombe, laundress, Draycott, Almshouse, and the date the West Block stopped dying. He wrote her name and her station where a doctor's name usually stands. A washerwoman at the head of a medical record, in a physician's own book, in his own hand. It could not be unwritten. Harrow could rule the room. Meacham could die lecturing. The committee could keep its silence and its fees, but it could not reach into a private casebook by a private candle and take back a name a man had chosen to write. That was the reverence. Not a salute, not a room full of gentlemen rising to their feet for the laundress. There was none of that, and there never would be. The reverence was 2 columns of numbers that told the truth, and one young man who wrote a poor woman's name where a rich man's name was meant to go. And reality, in the end, gave its own verdict, and reality does not sit on committees. The fever burned out in the boiled blocks, and it did not come back. Not that spring, not that summer. The copper ran hot the year round now, by order, and the thing in the bedding never again got its hold, because the thing in the bedding cannot live in boiling water, and Esther Coombe boiled everything. The register closed itself, east and west, both low, both quiet, from the day the copper reached them. The page was its own proof. It needed no doctor to sign it. It had already been signed, in a cramped hand, by the woman who buried them and wrote it down. Now come with me 6 months on, and we will close it. It is autumn in Elmsworth. The copper still runs. 7 shillings a week, paid without a murmur, and the coal for it never questioned again in any account, because a chairman's word had made it so, and a chairman's word is not lightly unmade. The steam still rises off the water. Esther's hands are still red to the wrist. She still lifts the wet cloth with the ash paddle worn smooth as a spoon. She still folds each sheet corner to corner and presses the crease flat with her palm. She still writes the names. Her original paper, the folded scrap from her apron band, rests now in the parish chest, filed among the Almshouse records, where a clerk put it and forgot it. And its copy rests in Dr. Price's casebook, with her name at the head of the column, where no clerk can forget it, because Price keeps that book by his own bed. And the men who ran the house? Let me give you each of them one dry line, and then we are done. Meacham died still lecturing on the air of low ground. He never revised a word. He went to his own grave, certain he had been right, and the certainty was the whole of his punishment, and he never felt it land. Harrow's minute book, if you go to the parish chest and open it, records a generous provision for the laundress on account of her diligence. That is what it says. Generous provision. Diligence. It does not contain the word copper. It does not contain the word boiling. It does not contain the 2 columns, nor the date the West stopped, nor one syllable of why a 4-shilling woman was raised to 7 and her fire kept lit the year round. Harrow managed his scandal. The record he left is a lie by omission, neat and quiet and complete. And the moral of it I will not preach at you, because it preaches itself, and because Esther Coombe would not have wanted a fuss. It is only this. The cure was already in the building. It had been there the whole time. It cost 4 shillings a week, and it was done by the person nobody thought to ask, while 12 men who cost 2 guineas the visit stood in the same rooms and called it hopeless. 2 houses, then, put them side by side, the way Price put the 2 columns. One house fumigates the air, burns its sulphur, sprinkles its vinegar, paints its walls white, trusts its 12 doctors, and keeps its burial register long. The other house boils the cloth, asks the cheapest servant what she does, and keeps its people. The difference between them was never the air. It was never the ground, nor the season, nor the letters after any name. The difference was a copper full of boiling water and a woman who was never told what she had done. There she is now, steam rising, hands red, folding. Tell me the town you're watching from. I want to know how far this one has travelled, how many houses, in the end, learned to boil the cloth.